A millionaire pays a homeless woman to have a baby, but her past leaves him speechless. The bustling streets of the city moved like clockwork, filled with hurried footsteps, honking cars, and the rhythmic hum of urban life. Among the crowd, a man stood apart, both figuratively and literally. Dressed in a tailored suit, Alexander Grant, a millionaire known for his ruthless business acumen, adjusted his cufflinks as he glanced impatiently at his watch. He was waiting for his driver when his gaze fell on an unusual sight across the street. A woman sat on the sidewalk, her appearance starkly out of place amidst the sleek storefronts and polished professionals. She was visibly pregnant, her clothes worn and ill-fitted, holding a makeshift cardboard sign that read, "I'm pregnant. Need money for baby?" Alexander's first instinct was to turn away, as he often did when faced with the city's harsh realities. But something about her, perhaps the determination in her eyes, despite her circumstances, made him pause. He frowned, then crossed the street. "Excuse me," he said, his deep voice cutting through the noise around them. The woman looked up, her dark eyes wary but defiant. "Can I help you?" she asked, clutching the sign closer to her chest. Alexander studied her for a moment. "What's your name?" She hesitated before answering. "Lila." "Lila," he repeated as though testing the name. "How far along are you?" "7 months," she replied, her tone cautious. "Why?" Alexander's mind raced. The truth was he hadn't intended to stop, let alone start a conversation. But now that he had, an idea was forming, a solution to a problem he hadn't yet resolved. His late wife's voice echoed in his memory. If we can't have a child of our own, why not consider surrogacy? It had been her dream, one he dismissed at the time, but now, with her gone, it felt like a way to honor her memory. "I have a proposition for you," Alexander said, his tone brisk. "I'm willing to support you financially in exchange for one thing. The baby." Lila's eyes widened, her grip tightening on the sign. "Excuse me?" "I know how it sounds," he said quickly, sensing her alarm. "But hear me out. I can give you money, a safe place to live, and the care you need to have a healthy pregnancy. In return, I'll adopt the baby after it's born." Lila stared at him, her expression a mix of disbelief and anger. "You think you can just buy a child?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "But I can provide a better life for your child than what you can right now." He gestured around them, to the cold streets and the people who passed by without so much as a glance. "This isn't about me. It's about giving that baby a chance." Lila's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, Alexander thought she might yell at him or send him away. But then, to his surprise, her shoulders slumped, and she let out a long, tired sigh. "What's the catch?" she asked quietly. "There's no catch," he said. "Just think about it. If you agree, I'll make sure you're taken care of now and after the baby is born." Lila was silent for a long time, her gaze fixed on the cracked sidewalk. Finally, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of resignation and determination. "All right," she said. "I'll hear you out." That evening, Lila found herself sitting in the back of a sleek black car, staring out the window as the city blurred past. Alexander sat beside her, typing on his phone, his expression unreadable. He had arranged for her to stay in a furnished apartment on the outskirts of the city, complete with prenatal care and a dedicated staff to attend to her needs. "You'll have everything you need there," Alexander said without looking up. "The doctor will visit twice a week, and a nutritionist will work with you to ensure the baby's health." Lila nodded, though the reality of what she had agreed to was still sinking in. "Why are you doing this?" she asked after a long silence. Alexander glanced at her, his blue eyes sharp. "Let's just say it's something I should have done a long time ago." He didn't elaborate, and Lila didn't press further. She had learned long ago not to dig too deep into people's motives. It rarely ended well. The apartment was everything Alexander had promised and more. Lila stood in the middle of the living room, taking in the plush furniture, the fully stocked kitchen, and the soft glow of the evening light filtering through the curtains. It was a world away from the cold, hard streets she had called home for the past year. As she settled in, Alexander's visits became frequent but brief. He would check in on her progress, ask about the baby's health, and ensure she had everything she needed. Their conversations were polite but distant, with neither of them venturing beyond the surface. But as the weeks passed, Lila began to notice cracks in Alexander's carefully constructed exterior. He would linger a moment longer than necessary, his gaze softening when he looked at her growing belly. Once, she caught him staring at a photo of a woman on his phone, his expression unreadable. Who was she? Lila asked one day, surprising even herself with the question. Alexander looked up sharply, his jaw tightening. What? The woman in the photo, Lila said. She must have meant a lot to you. Alexander's gaze hardened, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then he let out a quiet sigh, setting the phone down. She was my wife. She passed away 2 years ago. Lila's chest tightened at the rawness in his voice. I'm sorry. She wanted a child more than anything, Alexander continued, his tone distant. We tried for years, but it never happened. I thought I'd made peace with it, but after she was gone, it felt like I'd failed her. Lila didn't know what to say. She had her own ghosts, her own pain, but hearing Alexander's story made her see him in a new light. Beneath the cold, calculated exterior was a man grappling with loss and regret. As her due date approached, Lila found herself opening up to Alexander in ways she hadn't expected. She told him about her past, about the series of misfortunes that had left her homeless, about the father of her baby who had disappeared when he learned she was pregnant, and about her struggle to hold on to hope. I wasn't always like this, she said one evening as they sat in the living room. I had a job, a place to live. But life has a way of knocking you down when you least expect it. Alexander listened quietly, his expression unreadable. But when she finished, he said something that surprised her. You're stronger than you think, he said. Most people would have given up by now. But you're still here. Lila looked at him, her eyes welling with tears. Sometimes I don't know why. For the baby, Alexander said simply. And maybe for yourself too. When the day finally came, Alexander was by Lila's side in the hospital. Despite her initial hesitation, she had allowed him into the delivery room, sensing that he needed this as much as she did. The hours were long and painful, but when the baby's cries filled the room, all the tension melted away. It's a boy, the doctor announced, placing the baby in Lila's arms. Lila looked down at her son, her heart swelling with a love she hadn't thought possible. She glanced at Alexander, who stood frozen, his eyes wide with awe. Do you want to hold him? She asked softly. Alexander hesitated before nodding. When the nurse handed him the baby, his hands trembled slightly. He stared down at the tiny face, his expression a mix of wonder and vulnerability. Thank you, he whispered, his voice breaking. Thank you for giving him life. Lila smiled, tears streaming down her cheeks. You gave us both a chance. The days following the birth of the baby were transformative for both Lila and Alexander. The hospital discharged Lila after a few days of recovery, and Alexander arranged for her and the baby to return to the apartment. Though the original agreement had been for him to adopt the baby immediately, things didn't quite unfold that way. Take some time, Alexander said one evening, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. You should stay here until you're ready to make a decision. You've been through a lot, and I don't want to rush this. Lila blinked, surprised by his sudden leniency. She had expected the usual cold, businesslike demeanor. But there was something about the way Alexander looked at the baby, his gaze tender and almost hesitant, that made her realize he wasn't as detached as he tried to appear. The baby, whom Lila named Liam, became the center of their unusual world. He was small, with bright eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Lila spent her days caring for him, while Alexander visited every evening, bringing gifts for Liam and occasionally staying to hold him. Despite his awkwardness with the tiny child at first, Alexander quickly learned to cradle him with care, and his rare, genuine smiles began to appear more frequently. You're a natural, Lila teased one evening, watching as Alexander gently rocked Liam to sleep. Alexander snorted. I doubt that. But he seems to like me at least. Lila smiled. Babies are good at sensing kindness. Alexander didn't respond, but the words lingered with him long after he left that night. One quiet afternoon, as Liam napped in his bassinet, Lila sat in the living room flipping through a stack of papers Alexander had left behind. They were legal documents, adoption papers, custody agreements, and financial arrangements. She had avoided looking at them for weeks, unsure of what decision she wanted to make. Her past weighed heavily on her. She had spent so long on the streets, surviving day by day, that the idea of giving Liam to Alexander had initially seemed like the best option. He could give her son everything she couldn't: stability, safety, and a life free from struggle. But now, as she held one of Liam's tiny socks in her hand, she wondered if she was capable of more than she had given herself credit for. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. When she opened it, she was surprised to see Alexander standing there, holding a small box wrapped in blue paper. "I thought I'd stop by early today," he said, stepping inside. "How's Liam?" "Sleeping," Lila said, closing the door behind him. "What's this?" She gestured to the box. Alexander hesitated, looking uncharacteristically sheepish. "It's just a gift. I saw it and thought of him." Lila opened the box to find a small, intricately carved wooden mobile shaped like stars and moons. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, her throat tightening. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Thank you." Alexander nodded, his gaze drifting to the papers on the table. "Have you had a chance to look at those?" Lila stiffened slightly but nodded. "I've been thinking about it." "And?" he asked, his tone cautious. Lila took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his. "I know I agreed to give him up, but now, I'm not sure I can." Alexander's expression faltered, and for a moment, she thought he might be angry. But instead, he nodded slowly, his lips pressed into a thin line. "I understand." "You do?" she asked, surprised. "Yes," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about it too. And the truth is, I think he belongs with you." Tears welled in Lila's eyes as relief and gratitude washed over her. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Alexander said. "You're his mother. You've given him so much already." As the weeks turned into months, their unusual arrangement evolved into something neither of them had expected. Alexander became a constant presence in Liam's life, visiting nearly every day and forming a bond with the child that went beyond his initial intentions. He helped Lila navigate the challenges of motherhood, supporting her in ways she hadn't anticipated. But the more time they spent together, the more Alexander began to notice things about Lila that left him speechless. Her resilience, her humor, and her unwavering devotion to Liam stood in stark contrast to the hardships she had endured. She had been through so much, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that he couldn't help but admire. One evening, as they sat in the apartment watching Liam play with his toys, Alexander finally broached the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Lila," he said, his voice hesitant, "what happened to you? Before all of this, I mean." Lila looked at him, her expression guarded. For a moment he thought she might brush him off. But then she sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't talk about it much," she said quietly. "But I guess you deserve to know." She told him about her past, about growing up in a small town with parents who had struggled to make ends meet. Her father had left when she was young, and her mother had passed away when she was just 16. Left to fend for herself, Lila had worked a series of low-paying jobs, trying to stay afloat. But when she lost her job at a diner and couldn't pay her rent, she found herself on the streets. "I tried to get back on my feet," she said, her voice trembling. "But it felt like every time I took a step forward, something would knock me back. And then I found out I was pregnant." Alexander listened intently, his chest tightening as she spoke. He had always assumed that homelessness was the result of bad choices or laziness, but hearing Lila's story made him realize how wrong he had been. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I had no idea." "It's not your fault," she said, giving him a small, sad smile. "It's just life." Over time, Alexander's relationship with Lila and Liam deepened in ways he hadn't anticipated. What had started as a transactional agreement had become something far more meaningful, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. One evening, as they sat together in the apartment, Alexander looked at Lila with a newfound sense of clarity. "You know," he said, his voice steady, "you've taught me more than I ever thought possible." Lila raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, like what?" "Like what it means to care about something bigger than yourself," he said. "And how to see people for who they really are, not just where they come from." Lila smiled, her eyes soft. "You're not the man I met on the street that day. And you're not the woman holding that sign," he replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their journey settling over them. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice tinged with gratitude. "Thank you, Alexander. For everything." "No," he said, shaking his head. "Thank you. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed." In the months that followed, Alexander helped Lila secure a job and set up a savings account, ensuring that she and Liam would have a stable future. Though they were no longer bound by the terms of their original agreement, they remained close, their lives forever intertwined by the bond they had formed. Liam, now a happy, energetic toddler, became the center of their world. He brought out the best in both of them, reminding them of the power of love and second chances. As they celebrated Liam's first birthday together, surrounded by new friends and a sense of hope for the future, Lila looked at Alexander and realized how far they had come. What had started as an unlikely arrangement had turned into something she never could have imagined: a family. And for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The celebration for Liam's first birthday was small but filled with warmth. Balloons adorned the living room, and a simple homemade cake sat on the dining table, its single candle flickering in the soft light. Lila had insisted on baking the cake herself, wanting to make it special despite her limited experience in the kitchen. Alexander, true to his nature, had tried to convince her to order something elaborate, but she had stood her ground. "Trust me," she had said with a grin. "Liam won't care if it's a little crooked. He'll just be excited to smash his face into it." Now, as they gathered around the table, Alexander couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. A year ago, he had been a man consumed by loneliness and regret, and Lila had been a woman on the brink of despair. Yet here they were, singing happy birthday to a child who had become the center of their world. Lila held Liam in her arms as he reached for the candle, his chubby fingers curling in fascination at the flame. She laughed, gently pulling his hand back before helping him blow it out. The room erupted into cheers, and Liam giggled, his tiny hands clapping in delight. Alexander watched the scene with a rare smile, his heart swelling with an unfamiliar but welcome emotion. He had spent so much of his life chasing success and building walls around himself that he had forgotten what it felt like to simply be present, to share moments like this. "All right, buddy," Lila said, setting Liam in his high chair. "It's cake time." She placed the cake in front of him, and within seconds, Liam had both hands in the frosting, smearing it across his face with gleeful abandon. Lila and Alexander burst into laughter, their voices blending in a harmony that felt like home. As the evening wound down and Liam drifted off to sleep, Lila and Alexander found themselves sitting on the couch, a comfortable silence settling between them. The remnants of the celebration lay around them, wrapping paper, crumbs of cake, and a few scattered toys. It was a mess, but it was a happy one. "Today was perfect," Lila said, breaking the silence. "Thank you for being here. For everything." Alexander shook his head, his gaze soft. "I should be thanking you. Liam, he's changed my life." "He's changed both of ours," Lila said, her voice tinged with emotion. "But you've been there for us in ways I never expected. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't have to," Alexander said firmly. "This isn't about repayment. It's about family." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lila looked at him, her eyes searching his. "Do you really think that's what we are? A family?" Alexander hesitated, then nodded. "I do. Maybe not in the traditional sense, but yes. You and Liam mean more to me than I ever thought possible." Lila's lips curved into a small, shy smile. "You mean a lot to us too." They sat in silence for a while longer, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on them. But neither of them felt the need to fill the space. It was enough to simply be there, together. In the months that followed, their bond deepened in ways both subtle and profound. Alexander continued to play an active role in Liam's life, attending doctor's appointments, helping with bedtime routines, and even learning how to assemble toys, though his initial attempts often ended in frustration and laughter. You'd think a man who's run billion-dollar companies could handle a plastic playset, Lila teased one afternoon as she watched Alexander struggle with a particularly complicated set of instructions. It's not the same, Alexander grumbled, holding up a piece that didn't seem to fit anywhere. This thing defies logic. Lila laughed, taking the piece from him and snapping it into place with ease. See? Easy. Alexander rolled his eyes, but the corners of his mouth twitched upward. I'm starting to think you enjoy making me look bad. Only a little, Lila admitted, her grin widening. It was moments like these that reminded Alexander of how much his life had changed. He had spent years surrounded by luxury and power, but it was the simple, everyday moments with Lila and Liam that brought him the greatest joy. One day, as they sat in the park watching Liam toddle around on the grass, Alexander turned to Lila with a serious expression. I've been thinking, he began, his tone measured. About the future? Lila glanced at him, her brow furrowing. What about it? I want to make sure you and Liam are taken care of, Alexander said. Not just now, but in the long term. I've been talking to my lawyer about setting up a trust for Liam, and I'd like to include you in my will. Lila's eyes widened. Alexander, that's too much. I can't accept that. It's not too much, Alexander said firmly. It's the least I can do. You've given me something I never thought I'd have. A sense of purpose, a connection to something real. This is my way of showing how much you both mean to me. Lila was silent for a moment, her emotions swirling. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. That means more than I can say. As time went on, Lila began to rebuild her life in earnest. With Alexander's encouragement and support, she enrolled in a vocational program to become a medical assistant. It was a challenging but rewarding journey, and Lila found herself thriving in ways she hadn't thought possible. I feel like I finally have a direction, she told Alexander one evening as they celebrated her first day at her new job. Like I'm building a future for Liam. You are, Alexander said, his pride evident. And you're doing an incredible job. Liam, now a rambunctious toddler, had become the glue that held them together. His laughter filled their days, and his milestones, his first steps, his first words, were moments of shared joy and celebration. But even as their lives grew richer and more intertwined, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he wanted to say, more he wanted to share with Lila. He had spent so long keeping people at a distance, but with her, he felt a pull to be honest, to be vulnerable. One evening, as they sat on the couch after putting Liam to bed, Alexander finally found the courage to speak. Lila, he began, his voice steady but nervous. There's something I need to tell you. Lila looked at him, her expression curious but patient. What is it? Alexander took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When I first approached you on the street, I thought I was doing it for Liam. I thought it was about giving him a better life, about fulfilling a promise I'd made to my late wife. But now I realize it wasn't just about him. It was about you too. Lila's eyes widened, and Alexander pressed on before he could lose his nerve. You've changed me in ways I didn't think were possible, he said. You've shown me what it means to care, to be part of something bigger than myself. I care about you, Lila. More than I ever thought I could. For a moment, Lila was silent, her emotions too overwhelming to put into words. Then, slowly she reached out and took his hand. I care about you too, she said softly. You've been there for us when no one else was. You've become everything to me. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything felt right. The journey that had begun with a chance encounter on the street had brought them to a place of connection, understanding, and love. And as they sat together, their hands intertwined, they knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, laughter, and the promise of a future they would build together. The days that followed their heartfelt conversation were filled with a quiet sense of possibility. For the first time in years, Alexander felt like his life had direction, not in terms of business deals or profit margins, but in the simple and profound joy of being part of a family. He hadn't known how much he needed this until Lila and Liam had entered his life. Their dynamic began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Alexander no longer felt like an outsider, visiting occasionally to provide support. Instead, he became an integral part of their lives. He helped with bedtime routines, picked Liam up from daycare when Lila worked late, and even discovered a knack for making breakfast, though his attempts at pancakes were often lopsided and slightly burnt. "You're improving," Lila teased one morning as she watched him scrape the edges of a pancake from the pan. "Another week, and you might actually make one that doesn't stick." Alexander smirked, flipping the misshapen pancake onto a plate. "You're awfully confident for someone who still burns toast." Lila laughed, the sound light and warm. "Touché." It was moments like these that reminded Alexander of how far they had come. The guarded, formal interactions they'd once shared had been replaced with easy banter and genuine affection. They had built something real, a life that felt less like an arrangement and more like a partnership. One Saturday afternoon, Alexander took Lila and Liam to the park. It had become their favorite weekend tradition, a chance to escape the demands of work and enjoy the simple pleasure of watching Liam explore the world around him. As Liam toddled toward a group of children playing with a ball, Lila and Alexander sat on a nearby bench, the sunlight casting a golden glow over the scene. "He's growing so fast," Lila said, her voice tinged with both pride and wistfulness. "Sometimes I look at him and wonder how we got here." Alexander nodded, his gaze fixed on Liam. "It feels like yesterday he was just learning to crawl." Lila turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what's next? For us, I mean..." Alexander hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "I think about it all the time," he admitted. "But I don't want to rush you. I know how much you've been through, and I don't want to do anything that might make you feel pressured." Lila smiled, her eyes soft. "You're not pressuring me, Alexander. If anything, you've shown me what it means to have someone I can count on. I've never had that before." Her words hit Alexander like a wave, filling him with a mix of gratitude and determination. He reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "I want to be that person for you. For both of you." "You already are," Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. That evening, as they walked home from the park, Alexander made a decision. He wasn't one to act impulsively, but something about this moment, this chapter of their lives, felt right. He wanted to make it official, to solidify the bond they had built. The following week, while Lila was at work, Alexander went to a jewelry store. He spent hours browsing the cases, his usual decisiveness replaced with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Nothing felt quite right, too flashy, too simple, too impersonal. Finally, the jeweler presented him with a delicate ring featuring a single sapphire surrounded by diamonds. "This one," Alexander said, a rare smile breaking across his face. "It's perfect." The next weekend, Alexander planned a quiet evening at home. He cooked dinner, an ambitious attempt at Lila's favorite pasta dish, and set the table with candles and fresh flowers. Liam, sensing the excitement in the air, babbled happily in his high chair as Alexander worked. When Lila walked through the door, she stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. "What's all this?" she asked, setting her bag down. "Just a little surprise," Alexander said, his tone casual but his heart pounding. Lila smiled, her cheeks flushing. "You didn't have to do all this." "I wanted to," he said simply. They ate dinner together, the atmosphere warm and intimate. Alexander felt his nerves building with each passing moment, but he forced himself to stay calm. After they had finished eating and Liam had been put to bed, he guided Lila to the living room, where a fire crackled softly in the fireplace. "Lila," he began, taking her hands in his. "There's something I need to say." She looked at him, her expression curious but patient. "When I first met you, I thought I was helping you. I thought I was doing something good, something noble. But the truth is, you've given me so much more than I could ever give you. You've shown me what it means to care, to love, and to be part of something real." Tears welled in Lila's eyes as he continued. "I never imagined my life would look like this, but now I can't imagine it any other way. You and Liam, you're my family. And I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you both know how much you mean to me." With that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring, holding it out to her. "Lila, will you marry me?" For a moment, Lila was speechless, her emotions overwhelming her. Then, with a trembling smile, she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander slipped the ring onto her finger, and as they embraced, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. This was where he belonged, with Lila and Liam, building a life together, one filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. The months leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of planning and excitement. Lila insisted on keeping things simple, preferring an intimate ceremony over the grand affair Alexander had initially suggested. "It's not about the spectacle," she said one evening as they sat together, finalizing the guest list. "It's about the people who matter." Alexander nodded, his heart swelling with admiration for her. She had a way of grounding him, reminding him of what was truly important. On the day of the wedding, the small venue was filled with friends and loved ones, including many of the people who had supported Lila during her journey. Mrs. Taylor, a kind woman from the daycare, sat in the front row alongside Margaret, Alexander's longtime assistant, who had become an honorary member of their little family. Liam, now walking confidently, served as the ring bearer, toddling down the aisle with a mischievous grin. The sight of him drew laughter and applause from the guests, and Alexander couldn't help but smile as he watched his son, their son, steal the show. When Lila walked down the aisle, dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, Alexander felt his breath catch. She was radiant, her eyes shining with happiness, and for a moment he felt like the luckiest man in the world. As they exchanged vows, their voices steady but filled with emotion, Alexander realized how far they had come. What had started as a chance encounter on the street had grown into something extraordinary, a love story that defied the odds and brought them both to a place of healing and hope. "I promise to stand by you," Alexander said, his voice strong. "Through every challenge, every joy, and every moment in between. You've given me a reason to believe in love again, and for that, I'll be forever grateful." Lila's eyes filled with tears as she responded. "You've shown me what it means to be truly loved, to be seen and valued for who I am. I promise to walk this journey with you, hand in hand, as we build a life together." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the room erupted into cheers, and Alexander pulled Lila into a kiss, his heart bursting with happiness. The years that followed were filled with milestones and memories. Alexander and Lila welcomed another child, a baby girl named Evelyn, whose arrival brought even more joy into their lives. Liam, ever the doting big brother, quickly took to his new role, sharing his toys and watching over her with a sense of pride. As their family grew, so did their sense of purpose. Alexander, inspired by Lila's resilience and compassion, began dedicating more of his time to philanthropic work, focusing on initiatives that supported single mothers and families in need. Lila, now a certified medical assistant, balanced her career with her role as a mother and partner, finding fulfillment in both. Their home was filled with laughter, love, and the occasional chaos that came with raising young children. But through it all, they remained a team, navigating life's challenges together and cherishing the journey they had built. And on quiet evenings, as they sat on the porch watching Liam and Evelyn play in the yard, Alexander often found himself reflecting on how far they had come. What had started as a simple agreement had turned into a life he never could have imagined. A life filled with love, family, and the unshakable belief that second chances could lead to something beautiful. The years moved forward like pages turning in a cherished book, each chapter more fulfilling than the last. Alexander and Lila's family flourished in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Their home, once a quiet and solitary space for Alexander, became a vibrant hub of life, filled with children's laughter, spilled milk, late-night storytelling, and the occasional sibling squabble between Liam and Evelyn. Despite their busy lives, Alexander and Lila always made time to reflect on the path that had brought them together. They had forged something extraordinary from a chance meeting, and they carried that gratitude into every aspect of their lives. One day, as Alexander sat in his study, Liam, now a curious 6-year-old, bounded in, clutching a piece of paper in his small hands. "Dad," Liam exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. "Look what I made." Alexander turned his chair to face him, smiling warmly. "What is it, buddy?" Liam held up the paper, which was covered in colorful crayon drawings. In the center was a stick figure family, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and two smaller children. Above them, in Liam's careful but uneven handwriting, were the words, "My family." Alexander's chest tightened as he studied the drawing. "This is wonderful, Liam. Tell me about it." Liam pointed to each figure. "That's you, that's Mom, that's me, and that's Evelyn. I drew us at the park." "It's beautiful," Alexander said, pulling Liam into a hug. "You did an amazing job." Liam beamed, his pride evident. "Do you think I could put it on the fridge?" "Of course," Alexander said. "Let's do it right now." As they walked to the kitchen, Alexander glanced down at his son, marveling at how much he had grown. Liam was a bright, kind-hearted child, full of curiosity and boundless energy. Alexander often found himself wondering how different life might have been if he hadn't stopped to talk to Lila that day on the street. It was a thought that humbled him, reminding him of how much he had to be thankful for. While Alexander embraced his role as a father, Lila continued to thrive in her career. She had recently been promoted to lead medical assistant at the clinic where she worked, a role that came with new responsibilities and challenges. Though it was demanding, Lila found immense satisfaction in helping others, particularly single mothers and families who reminded her of her own struggles. One evening, as Alexander helped Liam with his homework, Lila returned home from work, her face flushed with excitement. "I have news," she announced, setting her bag on the counter. Alexander looked up, smiling. "Good news, I hope?" "The best," Lila said, her eyes shining. "The clinic is launching a new community outreach program, and they want me to lead it. It's focused on providing free healthcare services to underserved families." "That's incredible," Alexander said, standing to embrace her. "I'm so proud of you." "Thanks," Lila said, resting her head against his chest. "I've been wanting to do something like this for so long. It feels like everything I've been through has led me here." "It has," Alexander said softly. "And you're going to make a difference in so many lives." The outreach program quickly became a cornerstone of the clinic's work, and Lila poured her heart into it. She worked tirelessly to secure funding, recruit volunteers, and expand the program's reach. Alexander supported her every step of the way, using his connections to help raise awareness and secure additional resources. One afternoon, as Lila prepared for an event at the clinic, she came across an old photograph tucked into a folder of documents. It was a picture of herself from years ago, taken during one of the darkest periods of her life. She was sitting on the sidewalk, holding the cardboard sign that had caught Alexander's attention. She stared at the photo for a long time, her emotions swirling. It was a stark reminder of how far she had come, of the resilience that had carried her through those difficult times. But it was also a reminder of the kindness that had changed her life. The kindness of a man who had seen her not as a burden, but as a person worth helping. When Alexander arrived home that evening, Lila showed him the photo. "Do you remember this?" she asked, her voice quiet. Alexander studied the photo, his expression somber. "I do," he said. "It's hard to believe how much has changed since then." "It feels like a lifetime ago," Lila said. "But I'll never forget that moment. You didn't have to stop that day, but you did. And because of that, everything is different now." Alexander reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Stopping was the best decision I ever made." As the years passed, Alexander and Lila's family continued to grow, not just in size, but in depth. Their home became a place of love and laughter, a refuge for their children and a beacon of hope for those around them. Liam, now a thoughtful and compassionate teenager, often volunteered at the clinic with Lila, inspired by his parents' commitment to helping others. Evelyn, with her boundless energy and creative spirit, brought joy to everyone she met. Together, they formed a family that was as strong as it was unconventional. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Liam turned to Alexander with a question that caught him off guard. "Dad," he said, his brow furrowed, "how did you and Mom meet?" Alexander and Lila exchanged a glance, both of them smiling at the memory. "It's a long story," Alexander said. "But the short version is that I saw your mom one day and knew I had to talk to her." "Why?" Evelyn asked, her wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Because she had something special," Alexander said, his gaze soft as he looked at Lila. "And I knew I couldn't walk away." Lila reached for Alexander's hand, squeezing it gently. "And because of that, we found each other. And we found you too." Liam and Evelyn grinned, their expressions filled with the innocence and joy of childhood. For them, the story of their parents' journey was more than just a tale. It was a testament to the power of love, kindness, and second chances. In their later years, Alexander and Lila found themselves reflecting often on the life they had built together. They had faced their share of challenges, but they had faced them as a team, their love and resilience carrying them through. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Alexander turned to Lila with a smile. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" "All the time," Lila said, her gaze distant but warm. "It's still hard to believe how much has changed since then." "It's not just the changes," Alexander said. "It's the fact that we built this together. From nothing." Lila leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "And it's the best thing I've ever been a part of." "Me too," Alexander said softly. "Me too." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a golden glow, they sat in comfortable silence, their hearts full of gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. The legacy of Alexander and Lila's story extended far beyond their own lives. The outreach program Lila had spearheaded grew into a national initiative, providing healthcare and support to thousands of families. Liam, inspired by his parents' dedication, pursued a career in social work, while Evelyn channeled her creative talents into art therapy, helping children express themselves through creativity. Through it all, the family remained close, their bond unshakable. They knew that their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And as they gathered together for family dinners, celebrated milestones, and created new memories, they were reminded of one simple truth: love has the power to transform lives. As the years unfolded, the life Alexander and Lila had built together grew even richer, interwoven with love, resilience, and purpose. The family's story became an inspiration to many, particularly through the outreach programs spearheaded by Lila and supported by Alexander. Their work touched lives far and wide, turning their personal journey into a beacon of hope for countless others. One brisk autumn afternoon, Alexander and Lila stood in a sunlit field outside the city, watching Liam and Evelyn fly kites. The children's laughter rang out against the backdrop of rolling hills and golden leaves, a sound that filled both parents with joy. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Lila asked, her voice soft. Alexander glanced at her, his gaze thoughtful. "All the time. If I hadn't stopped that day, if you hadn't agreed to trust me." "It's strange to think about," Lila said, her eyes following the bright kites as they soared higher. "But I'm glad we ended up here. Together." Alexander nodded, his hand reaching for hers. "Me too. You and the kids, you've given my life meaning in ways I didn't think were possible." For a moment, they stood in silence, the crisp breeze rustling the leaves around them. It was a rare and cherished pause in their busy lives, a moment to reflect on how far they'd come. As the seasons turned, Liam and Evelyn grew into remarkable young adults, each carving their own path while carrying the lessons they had learned from their parents. Liam, now a passionate social worker, dedicated himself to helping underserved communities, often collaborating with Lila's outreach program. One evening, as the family gathered around the dinner table, Liam shared an update about a family he had been working with. "It's been tough," he admitted, his brow furrowed. "But I think we're making progress. They're starting to trust us." "You're doing incredible work, Liam," Lila said, her pride evident. "It's not easy, but it's so important." Alexander nodded in agreement. "You're making a difference. Never forget that." Evelyn, who had recently graduated from college, chimed in. "It's inspiring, seeing how much you care about helping people. I think it's why I've been drawn to art therapy. It's another way to reach people who need support." Lila beamed at her daughter. "I'm so proud of both of you. You've taken everything we've taught you and turned it into something beautiful." Alexander leaned back in his chair, a rare smile gracing his face. "You've both surpassed anything I could have imagined. Your mom and I are lucky to call you ours." One day, as Lila prepared for a community event at the outreach center, she received a call from an unfamiliar number. Curious, she answered, only to be greeted by a voice from her past. Lila, the woman said hesitantly. It's Anna. From the shelter. Lila's breath caught in her throat. Anna had been a friend during one of the darkest periods of her life, a fellow resident at a women's shelter where Lila had stayed briefly before ending up on the streets. Anna? Lila said, her voice shaking. I can't believe it. How are you? I'm okay, Anna said, though her tone betrayed a hint of weariness. I heard about the work you're doing and I wanted to reach out. I thought, maybe you could help me. Lila's heart ached at the vulnerability in Anna's voice. Of course, she said. Tell me what's going on. As Anna shared her story, Lila listened intently, her emotions swirling. Anna had fallen on hard times, struggling to provide for her 2 young children after losing her job. She had reached out to Lila not just out of desperation, but because she had seen in her an example of someone who had overcome similar struggles. Come to the center, Lila said firmly. We'll figure this out together. When Anna arrived at the outreach center later that week, Lila greeted her with a warm hug, tears springing to both their eyes. Though the years had changed them, their bond was still intact, forged in shared pain and resilience. Thank you for seeing me, Anna said, her voice trembling. I didn't know where else to turn. You're not alone, Lila said, her tone steady. We'll get through this. Just like we did back then. Lila quickly mobilized her team, connecting Anna with housing resources, job training programs, and childcare support. As Anna began to rebuild her life, Lila felt a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder of why she had dedicated herself to this work. At home, Lila shared Anna's story with Alexander, who listened with quiet attentiveness. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. You've come full circle, he said. Helping someone who was there for you when you needed it most? Lila smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. It feels like everything I've been through has led me to this moment. To be able to give back, it's the best feeling in the world. Alexander reached for her hand, his grip firm but gentle. I'm proud of you, Lila. You've turned your pain into something powerful, and you've been with me every step of the way, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. I couldn't have done any of this without you. As the years went on, Alexander began to slow down, his age catching up with him in ways he couldn't ignore. Though his mind remained sharp, his body grew frilier, and he often found himself reflecting on the legacy he would leave behind. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Lila, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he turned to her with a serious expression. Lila, he said quietly, there's something I need to say. She looked at him, her brow furrowing. What is it? I want you to promise me something, he said. When the time comes that I'm no longer here, I want you to keep going. Keep building this life we've created. For you, for the kids, and for everyone we've been able to help. Lila's chest tightened, and she reached for his hand. Don't talk like that, she said. We still have so much time. I know, Alexander said, his voice gentle but firm. But I need to know that you'll carry this forward. That everything we've worked for won't end with me. Lila nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I promise, she said. But you're not going anywhere anytime soon. We still need you. Alexander smiled, his eyes filled with love. And I need you. More than I ever thought possible. In the years that followed, Alexander's health continued to decline, but his spirit remained strong. Surrounded by the love of his family, he found peace in the life they had built together. When the time finally came for him to say goodbye, it was in the arms of the woman who had changed his life, his heart full of gratitude and love. Lila mourned deeply, but she honored Alexander's memory by continuing the work they had started. The outreach programs expanded even further, and she took comfort in knowing that his legacy lived on in every life they touched. Liam and Evelyn, now adults, carried their father's values forward, each finding their own way to make a difference in the world. Together, they supported their mother, ensuring that the family bond Alexander had cherished remained unbroken. Years later, as Lila sat on the porch of their home, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. It had been a life filled with challenges, but also with love, hope, and redemption. And as she watched the next generation playing in the yard, their laughter echoing in the warm evening air, she felt a profound sense of peace. Alexander's words came back to her then, a reminder of the promise she had made. Keep building this life we've created. And she had. She had built a legacy of love, one that would endure long after she was gone. A testament to the power of kindness, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unbreakable bond of family.